What's up, Buckeye fans? It's Patrick Murphy from Bucknuts and 24/7 Sports here for another episode of the Bucknuts Happy Hour. We're getting into the festive season. As you can see, if you're watching this on YouTube, we've got a little festive decorations going on here, recording this on December 11th. We are getting close to the start. Well, I guess it is kind of already the holiday period. Hard to think about when you're in the middle of the Buckeye postseason. I was talking to somebody the other day. I haven't done much Christmas shopping yet because I've been so busy covering this team. As you know, the Buckeyes lost their first game of the season, 13-10, a familiar score, losing before the postseason to Indiana in the Big Ten championship game. We won't touch on a ton on that game on this episode of the Bucknuts Happy Hour. We've talked about a lot on the BM5 and just over on Bucknuts in general. We will reference some things that happened from the game because we are going to look forward to the college football playoff and sort of the Buckeyes' path, how that path might play out. What's the best case scenario for the Buckeyes? Did the Buckeyes get a little screwed with their path? And just some thoughts on how the Buckeyes get back to winning another national championship after losing to Indiana on Saturday. I did not get a guest for this week. There were a couple guys I reached out to that weren't able to do it this week. So it will be just me. So probably a shorter show than some of our others, but still going to dive into some topics. Before we do, please make sure if you're watching this on YouTube, you hit that thumbs up button, click the bell for notifications when we post, all of our videos. There's going to be plenty more as we head to Dallas for the Cotton Bowl, so you won't want to miss those, plus all the podcasts. If you're listening to this on your podcast platform of choice, please make sure to leave a 5-star review and all of that stuff to help us out there. But let's get into Buckeye football. And look, it's a difficult situation that the Buckeyes are in, right? Because I think there are a lot of people that still, and I know it's difficult not to, have this mindset of like one loss and what it, what that means in college football. And for so long, one loss was the end of a season. And this is not meant to excuse the Buckeyes for their performance against Indiana at all. That game was there to be won, and they did not win it. Credit for that has to go to Indiana to some degree, but also Ohio State not taking advantage of some opportunities there, which we've covered over the last week or so. So I think you have to have this shift in approach. And I know we're still kind of working through the changing landscape of college football, that there's still a lot out there. And I think it's better. Obviously, losing to Indiana is different than losing to Michigan a year ago. And so it's hard to compare the fan reaction to that. But I think the reaction has been much more tempered, disappointed, no doubt about it, recognizing that there was a Big Ten championship on the line, the opportunity for an undefeated season, all of that, which is now down the tube, but knowing that there is still plenty to play for here in the college football playoff. And perhaps it helps that a year ago, obviously the Buckeyes bounced back from a loss in the final game of the regular season, this time in the Big Ten championship game. I wrote about this on Sunday as we were coming home from Indianapolis, but this is an opportunity, I think, for Ohio State. If you are trying to look at this from a positive perspective, an opportunity to use that loss as fuel for a playoff run as they did a year ago. It's different. I'm not trying to say they are the same. Again, losing to Michigan and losing to Indiana are very different things. But I think the end result could be a positive one if you are expecting the Buckeyes to make a run here. I say that not only because we saw Ohio State do that last year, but I think that there is something to going into these 3 weeks of practice, 3.5 weeks of practice, with a bit of a chip on your shoulder. And that's not to say that Ohio State wouldn't have handled business if they win the Big Ten championship and look to go undefeated throughout the season. But I do think that now, instead of hearing how great Ohio State is for the next 3.5 weeks before you play in the Rose Bowl, you are going to hear about other teams. You're going to hear about Indiana a lot. And Ohio State, over at the Woody Hayes Athletic Center, they've got TVs on various sports channels throughout the day that players walk around and walk by and see, coaches walk by and see. they're going to hear about Indiana. There's a thread on the front row message board over on Bucknuts already discussing how the talking heads across college football, many are picking Georgia to make it to the national championship, beat Ohio State. And we'll get to the bracket here in a little bit because I do think that's worth discussion. So I think that is something that maybe fires you up a bit more. And you go into practice every day with, like I said, that chip on your shoulder if you're a Buckeye player or coach. Whereas if you win that game, you're feeling good about things. Ryan Day talked about it. Sometimes a loss, you don't want to take a loss, but sometimes it makes you see some things that you were able to do and get wins and not necessarily clean up. And you don't want it to happen that way. You want to be able to identify your issues while still winning. But you look at Ohio State's schedule, really, almost every team in college football, even the strongest of schedules, you're going to have most of your games where you're heavy favorites if you're one of the top teams in the country. And so you get by in some of those things. And look, the red zone, that's one in particular. I wrote about that this week as well. You can read it over on Bucknuts in our Upon Further Review piece. Ohio State has been able to do things in the red zone that they weren't against Indiana because they were playing better teams. And I think maybe it allowed them to get a little bit, I don't want to say complacent because I don't think that's fair, but just there was a lack of creativity in the red zone on Saturday night. You look at some of the plays, run up the middle. Okay, well, that hasn't worked well for Ohio State all season. Now, against Purdue, against Wisconsin, against some other teams, you could run C.J. Donaldson 4 times if you wanted to, and you're probably going to get in the end zone because you're just bigger, stronger, and able to power it in. Is that the best way to do it? I think we learned on Saturday, not that they used C.J. Donaldson in the red zone, that it's not. That they lacked any sort of creativity to be able to score against what was probably the best defense, just certainly the best defense they have faced, maybe the best defense they will face, and certainly one of the best defensive lines. And so I think you needed more out of that. What is that? Not throwing to a one-man route, for instance, on the Jeremiah Smith third down attempt where Julian Sayin rolls out to his left and there's one guy in the route that you have an option to. Even the third down before the Jaden Fielding missed field goal, you have a running back and your third tight end who's not known as a pass catcher as your 2 options. And I do think if Julian Sayin quickly gets that ball to Bo Jackson, he probably scores, he probably gets the first down. And Bennett Christian, a hell of a play by the Indiana defender Hardy to stick with Bennett Christian. Because if Bennett Christian is wide open there, that play looks great, right? Assuming he catches it, which you expect that he would, even if he isn't a pass-catching tight end. But you just limit your options when you do some of those things. And I thought Ohio State did that too much. And so the point of all that is, I think now you have to go and really re-examine the red zone, right? And what can we do differently there if you're Ohio State? And I think that has to be something that gets worked on quite a bit. Whereas if, say, Jaden Fielding makes that field goal, you get a stop and get a score and you win the game, or you go to overtime and win the game, you're saying, yeah, we need to clean up some things in the red zone, which the Buckeyes have talked about a lot this season. But do you dial into it as much if you don't lose the game? You don't want to have to go that far, but sometimes a loss can be a catalyst for things beyond, which we saw last year and you hope to see this season. So I think there's that it could help Ohio State. There's also the bracket. And I think most people were a little surprised with the way the bracket broke down. I know as we are driving home from the Big Ten championship game, we're talking about it. And we were almost certain that Ohio State was going to drop to the 3. Most teams have, after a loss in the conference championship game, have dropped 2 spots. And you're not out of the field, or you're not punished like Ohio State wouldn't have been punished by losing their first round bye. But you dropped to that number 3. And honestly, I think that would have been the best situation for Ohio State. I think Ohio State got a little screwed here. And I'm sure you've all looked at the bracket. Ohio State obviously will play in the Cotton Bowl on December 31st, New Year's Eve, a day that Buckeye fans know well for playoff games. And unfortunately so, you're hoping to erase those demons, but you're playing the winner of the 7-10, which is Texas A&M and Miami. And we'll talk about those teams here in a little bit. But if you are the 3 seed, which is where Georgia is, you are playing the winner of Ole Miss and Tulane. And Ole Miss is without a coach. Their head coach, Lane Kiffin, he leaves for LSU, and there's a lot of drama surrounding that. We don't know what Ole Miss looks like without Lane Kiffin. I don't imagine they are better without Lane Kiffin. Maybe they are neutral and about the same, and so you're playing still a good team. Or you're somehow, now Tulane and Ole Miss played earlier this season, and it did not go well for the Green Wave. They lost that game 45-10 back in, when was that? Back in September. Now, I did just hear an interview with Tulane linebacker the other day who was talking about how, they are a much different team than they were at that point, and we'll see. But I think if you are Ohio State, you would have much preferred to have that first round bye and then play either an Ole Miss team without its head coach or a Tulane team that, frankly, let's be honest, is a group of 5, group of 6, whatever we're calling it these days. And, just probably, while I believe that those teams deserve a chance to be in the field, you'd be such a big favorite. Now, I think you could flip it if you want to play devil's advocate and make an argument. Now, say you're playing Ole Miss or Tulane, do you have that same level of motivation? You assume that Ole Miss, and obviously it depends on how that game goes, but you assume Ole Miss without its head coach, not as good as I was saying. Tulane, if they were to somehow upset Ole Miss, does Ohio State get as up for that game as they would either Texas A&M or Miami? That's the positive approach. But I do think that Ohio State got a little screwed in this. And if you look at the rest of the bracket, you'll have James Madison playing Oregon for the right to play Texas Tech in the Orange Bowl, and then Alabama playing Oklahoma for the right to play Indiana in the Rose Bowl. Again, if I'm Indiana, I'm not sure I love that matchup either. Alabama, Oklahoma, I think you can beat either of those teams, no doubt. But Alabama, if they are healthy, they were not healthy in the SEC championship game, lost to Georgia. If they get healthy in the next few weeks, they're as dangerous as any team in the country. Oklahoma, been hit or miss. It's hard to really judge that team throughout the year because losing quarterback John Mateer and then having him come back, probably a little bit too early. But over the last few weeks, they have looked good, including beating Alabama at Alabama. So I don't think Indiana's looking at this schedule and saying, boy, this is a cakewalk to the national championship game or even to the semifinal. And I think that brings apart a bigger conversation, which maybe we have in the offseason or something about, and maybe by the time we would have that conversation, the format's changed and, we're talking about 16 teams or something. But it seems to me that this playoff bracket doesn't make much sense. Because Ohio State being the number 2 seed, the number 2 team in the country, you'd say the same about Indiana, Georgia, or Texas Tech. They miss out on the opportunity to host a playoff game. That just doesn't make sense to me. I said the same last year while Ohio State did host a playoff game. These teams should be rewarded with the revenue and everything that comes with hosting a playoff game and having a game of that magnitude on your campus. You should earn that. And it's nice to have a bye, don't get me wrong, but I do not think that it makes sense that Ohio State doesn't get that type of gate revenue for a playoff game. Think about the game against Tennessee last year, and just the atmosphere and everything. What an awesome game! But also you had this packed stadium, everything that came with it. I mean, think about the businesses that are on campus or bars and restaurants that thrive on game days, especially home game days, tailgates, all stuff like that. You miss out on all that. Now you do get the games, obviously, people that don't attend for the quarterfinal, but that's not the same, and you hope that you get those anyway. I also think the fact that you're off for 3.5 weeks is not ideal for the higher seeded team. I think you look at like the NFL, for instance, you're off a week and we still talk about rust and rust versus rest for those teams heading into those games, the number one seeds in either conference. So I think there needs to be a rethinking of this whole thing. And again, this is probably a bigger conversation to be had, but a lot of this just does not make sense. You are essentially punishing teams for being the better teams, and in more ways than one. And I think if you see last year, all four of the teams that got byes lost in the quarterfinal, and some of that had to do with the way they had the format and the conference champions getting the top four spots and the byes. That is not the case this year, but so you expect that there will be fewer upsets in the quarterfinals, but still, say two of the teams lose, two of the higher seeded quarterfinal teams lose. There's going to be a lot of talk about, did that time off really help, or did it hamper? And that brings me into something I want to talk about, because I think Ohio State has to make sure they use this time correctly. And Ryan Day talked about it a little bit, and there's two kind of conversations to be had here. And the first is one that's been talked about a lot this week, and that's Brian Hartline. Ryan Day said he's spending this current week down at South Florida in Tampa as he's getting ready to become the head coach down there. And that's a little odd. Don't get me wrong. I think having him be away from Ohio State for a full week as the Buckeyes, as Ryan Day said, begin to, sort of prep and evaluate and the very early stages of putting in the game plan. You're doing that without your offensive coordinator. That is an odd way to do that. And I'm not privy to the conversations between Ryan Day and Brian Hartline. I don't know who decided that would be the best way to do it. I think back to Tom Herman in 2014 and Luke Fickell in, I think it was 2017, when they were both on staffs that were preparing for college football playoffs. And we're also sort of balancing head coaching stuff, like Urban Meyer with Tom Herman. I remember him talking about, like, when he's in this building, when he's here, he's focused on Ohio State. And that's the same with Brian Hartline, but you're giving him a full week. Now, maybe Ryan Day is going to be more involved with the offensive play calling and game planning than he is during the season. Recruiting is done. This was the case last year, even with Chip Kelly involved. So this isn't just a Brian Hartline conversation. So maybe Ryan Day is confident enough that, hey, between himself and Keenan Bailey and Carlos Lachlan and Tyler Bowen and Billy Fessler and all these guys, hey, we can get this stuff. We can evaluate film. We can, take our notes. We can have our conversations. And then when Brian gets back, now that he's kind of taken care of all that, he can put that more or less, you won't be able to do it entirely, but more or less to the side and really dive into Ohio State and catch back up. He'll still have 2.5 weeks to catch back up with anything that they decided to change and give his input and anything like that. So I think that's a possibility that is being considered by Ohio State. But it is just a strange look to tell your offensive coordinator, hey, yeah, you can go away for a week and we'll figure this out. Obviously not an ideal scenario just in general, because you are, having your offensive coordinator pulled to two different places. But it's a little odd. It's a little odd to me to do it that way. But you hope that there's a plan in place and that the Buckeyes, get that offense humming at the best way possible. I do not believe that Brian Hartline is going anywhere. I know people have talked about, will he still be the offensive coordinator? Will he still call plays for the college football playoff? Ryan Day was asked about that. He said, yes, he will, more or less. But it is just a strange situation. And Brian Hartline's going to have to manage this, and so is the rest of the coaching staff. Fortunately, you have a outside of Billy Fessler, and Keenan Bailey's been around long enough. Like, you have a pretty veteran staff. So you expect that they can handle something like this. The other side of it is, how much work are you giving guys? Like, let's just use Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate. Throw Brandon Inniss in there as well as an example. Those are guys that have all been dealing with injuries. Carnell Tate missed 3 games. Jeremiah Smith missed 1 game. Brandon Inniss hasn't missed a game, but his snaps have decreased the last 2 weeks. He played, I think it was 22 snaps around there. on Saturday against Indiana as they used more tight ends, which I wrote about that as well. If you want to read about that over on Bucknuts. So those are guys that I think you can give time to recover a bit more so they are closer to 100%. But you also don't want things to become too rusty, right? You don't want, usually if you have just a week off, you get back out. And we've talked about it with Ryan Day. And sometimes after that bye week, the Buckeyes don't come out looking their best. Like, you need to be ready to go. And now Ohio State last year, they did have that time between the Big Ten championship game, the Michigan game and the first round of the college football playoff, which was similar time because you didn't have the Big Ten championship game in there, but still not quite as long. So there needs to be a good management of the rest for players that need it, but also keeping, as Ryan Day said, that edge that you'll need going against what are two pretty good teams. So I think that that's going to be a big challenge, and one that you could argue last year, some teams, Oregon, I'm looking at Oregon, didn't handle the best way. And, I'm not involved with the Oregon program or cover the Oregon program. I've talked to a couple people that have said they don't think that the time off was really the issue, that it was just, Ohio State being better and motivated and things like that. And that may be the case. But, we even saw it you go back to the BCS national championship games. And Ohio State at that point didn't play a conference championship game while other conferences did. So they had an extra week of games and prep and things like that, and prepping for a game and playing a competitive game. When Ohio State didn't, at that point it was, sometimes a month between games. And I think it affected, Big Ten teams and specifically Ohio State. So navigating that, I think, is going to be crucial for Ohio State so that you come out on December 31st and are raring to go and playing, similar to what the Buckeyes did against Tennessee and Oregon last year, where you just come out and boom, 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 all of a sudden you've got the opponent on its heels and you're up big, those type of things. I think it's important to get off to good starts in these games and not have to, sort of find your rhythm again, which will be difficult to do. Compounding matters is you're playing against, as I said, two pretty good teams. I've been asked multiple times over the last week or last few days, I guess I should say, like, who, if you're Ohio State, who do you want to play? I think the obvious answer is Miami. Not only are they the lower seed and a 2-loss team, but you're playing this game in the Cotton Bowl, which is about 3 hours from Texas A&M's campus. And the playoff committee chair said they chose to put Ohio State in the Cotton Bowl as opposed to the Orange Bowl, which would have been played in Miami's home stadium, to avoid playing in Miami's home stadium, even though you're still in the state of Texas. Honestly, I think you could have made the argument that it would have been better to have Ohio State play in the Orange Bowl and risk playing Miami. If you've watched many Miami games this year, it's not like those fans packed that stadium all the time. This is not a slight on them. It's not in Miami, the stadium, and it's out in Fort Lauderdale, I believe. And but I think you would have had a pretty good turnout of Ohio State fans, and Miami fans would have shown up too. It's a playoff game, don't get me wrong, but I think you would have been more comfortable with that sort of road game, quote unquote, than you will what is known as one of the best fan bases or most ravenous fan bases in the country, in the Texas A&M fans traveling 2 hours, 3 hours to get to Dallas or Arlington. So there's that. So I think Miami makes sense for that, but also just on paper, I think Texas A&M is a better team. This was a team that up until the final weekend of the regular season, that Friday, was one of the 3 undefeated teams along with Ohio State and Indiana, and had run through now a relatively easy schedule. The only ranked opponent that Texas A&M played until they played Texas was Notre Dame, who were number 8. The Irish were number 8 at the time back in mid-September. And they won that game 41-14, a wild game, and a game that, was part of keeping Notre Dame out of the college football playoff, which is another topic. But this was a relatively easy schedule, but they were still undefeated. And teams lose games that they shouldn't. Ask Alabama, right? Losing to Florida. Texas A&M played Florida back in October and won 34-17. So this is a team that has some interesting things to it. Marcel Reed is a dangerous player. No doubt about that. The quarterback threw for almost 3,000 yards, 25 touchdowns, did throw 10 interceptions. So he is capable and willing to throw interceptions. Threw multiple interceptions in a game 3 times, including that loss to Texas in late November. So, if the Ohio State defense is opportunistic, they might be able to get some takeaways, but he's also, talented with his legs, a true dual threat guy. This season, rushed for 466 yards and 6 touchdowns. And it's just kind of the off-schedule plays that I think will have you concerned if you're Ohio State, and looking at what he can do, especially when you look at what Fernando Mendoza did against Ohio State's defense a week ago or last week in the Big Ten championship game. Just the ability to buy time, the ability to, either pick up yards with your legs or scramble around to get people open. Reed is certainly capable of doing that. And that's something that I thought Ohio State had done a pretty good job with throughout the season. But Fernando Mendoza, I thought, really was able to make some plays that way, just by doing things with his legs that Ohio State wasn't able to stop, keeping drives alive, stuff like that could be problematic as you look ahead to this game. And then Casey Concepcion, the receiver, he's the one that stands out. 9 touchdowns, 886 receiving yards. Mario Craver also 825. So they've got 2 guys that can hurt you. I think Ohio State saw against Indiana again, a team that had multiple receivers, and a couple of them got loose. And so that's something I think certainly you will be aware of. On the defensive line, and that's an area which I'm going to keep an eye on. There is some talent on Texas A&M's defensive line. I don't think it scares you. It's certainly not Indiana. Cassius Howell had 11.5 sacks. He led the team by quite a bit there, but it is a team that can get you under some pressure, which will be a topic, I think, going into the game. So, I think the Aggies have the opportunity to cause you more problems. Now, I say that, flip it over to the Miami side. They've lost 2 games. They lost to Louisville on October 17th and then at SMU on, November 1st. That was an overtime loss. I thought that Miami started to play better after that Louisville game. And I won't say that I've watched every Miami game. I haven't, but I did watch some. And you just even looking at the scores after the Louisville game, they pound Stanford 42-7, sort of a bounce back the next week. Then at SMU, as I said, they lose 26-20 in overtime. But then Syracuse, NC State, Virginia Tech, all comfortable wins. And then the last Saturday of the regular season, with kind of a lot on the line to stay in sort of the playoff conversation, at Pittsburgh, 38-7. Pittsburgh's not great, but it is a ranked opponent. And so I think that, they started to find some things to play better. When Carson Beck, obviously the former Georgia quarterback, when he is at his best, I think Miami plays at its best. Now there has been some, blaming, finger pointing from Carson Beck at times, which you don't love from your quarterback. But you think that it seems like they've sorted some of that stuff out. He threw for 3,072 yards, 25 touchdowns, again, 10 picks. So, Ohio State will have the opportunity, regardless of which quarterback they play, to turn the ball over. He only had 3 games, with multiple turnovers, including the 4 interception game against Louisville, which was a main reason. Only sacked 9 times this year, but I do think you can get after that. That offensive line, Miami has really loaded up in the trenches the last couple of years, and that will be something to watch. Has it been perfect? No, but I think that has been a focus. Mark Fletcher, a guy Ohio State recruited, the running back, 685 yards, average 4.9 yards per carry, 10 touchdowns. He's a guy I think you have to be aware of. I'm not sure he's someone who's you're worried he's going to kill you. They do. Chamar Brown also, had 100 carries this year, not nearly as efficient, but Mark Fletcher is going to be the guy on the ground And then Malachi Toney had a really good season, 970 yards, 7 touchdowns in his, I just want to check. He is a freshman. Yeah, a really good season. Miami defensive line, Reuben Bain Jr., I think he's the guy to know, even though he's not their sack leader. He's a guy who can cause problems. I'm going to be honest about that. And that worries me a little bit. I think either way, if you're Ohio State, you feel okay with these matchups. The Buckeyes should be able to handle either opponent, even if you do have to play Texas A&M, 3 hours from their campus. You did that against Texas last year, playing in the Cotton Bowl, and Ohio State was on a silent count, basically playing it like a road game in that, and we all know how that went. Different Ohio State team, no doubt about it. But I do feel like you should feel like the favorite, and you are going into both these games. I'm sure the lines have come out. I have not seen them for what it would be if Ohio State played either of these two teams, but I imagine they are a decent favorite in either of these games to get to the semifinal and presumably play Georgia. In order for that to happen, in order for Ohio State to reach its goals, this Buckeye offensive line has to play better. It has to. And this isn't me reacting just to this Indiana game. I think over sort of the second half of the season, Ohio State's offensive line the production has declined in terms of what they're able to do. And it's strange to me because this offensive line, if you look at the 5 guys starting, Austin Sierreveld, Tegra Shabola, Luke Montgomery, Carson Hinsman, those 4 were all starters in the college football playoff a year ago, playing really well. You add in Phillip Daniels, who has not been perfect by any stretch, but has been good enough, I think, as your right tackle. And you think, okay, you got a really solid offensive line. And they started the season well. But then I want to take you going back to the Wisconsin game. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 games. The pressure's given up, according to Pro Football Focus. Against Wisconsin, they gave up 11. That's not a good Wisconsin defensive line. Penn State, 11. Purdue, 9. That's not a good. Penn State, good defensive line. Not great, but good. Has NFL players on it. Purdue, 9. Not a good defensive line. UCLA, 5. Rutgers, 5. Michigan, 2. Michigan, not a good defensive line. I think we probably gave the offensive line too much credit after that. Then against Indiana, a season-high 12 pressures allowed. So you've been going backwards in terms of the protection you're giving to Julian Sayin. I mean, certainly on Saturday, he was under fire as much as he had been all year. And I know that the immediate thought will be, Tegra Shabola, change the right guard. And look, I think Ohio State would certainly benefit from better play at the right guard position. But he's not the only reason that Ohio State has struggled this year, sort of the second half of this year, like I was saying on the offensive line. Just using the Indiana game as an example, let me pull up the sorry, I had it pulled up and then I'd gone away from it. Let's see. So the offensive line on Saturday, 12, as I said, 12 pressures given up. Who gave up the most? I bet you'd guess Tegra Shabola, but you'd be wrong. That was Luke Montgomery. Luke Montgomery gave up 3. The second most with 2 was a 3-way tie between Phillip Daniels, Austin Sierreveld, and Tegra Shabola. The only offensive lineman who started the game who did not give up the pressure was Carson Hinsman, according to PFF. And the pass blocking grades for Ohio State against Indiana were not what you want to see in a conference championship game. It was the reason, other than the red zone, and I think those two might go hand in hand to some degree, but other than the red zone, that was the reason that the Buckeyes lost the game. If Julian Sayin has a clean pocket to play with for most of the game, as we kind of expected, I think the result looks different. To me, the thing standing in Ohio State's way, potentially, of not reaching its goal of winning a national championship is the play of this offensive line. And I wouldn't have said that the first half of the year. I probably wouldn't have even said that a month or so ago. But kind of looking back at it, you can't have sort of the fall that this group has had. If you think about a year ago, like this is when the Buckeye offensive line started playing its best. And now it is playing its worst, if we're being honest. And, what do you do if you're Ohio State? Well, I guess first, why? Why is this happening? And that's tough to answer. I know there was a lot of criticism of Justin Fry and his recruiting, but he got these guys to play. Now, this is not, I'm not taking a shot at Tyler Bowen because, I think for the most part, he's done a good job. But you've got a group that has not taken the next step after starting the season well. And, I think Tyler Bowen and his assistants need to evaluate what isn't going as well. What, are these guys banged up? Maybe, that could be a thing. Is it as simple as getting a different right guard in there? Does that affect things enough? It certainly makes an impact when Tegra Shabola is blocking no one or blocking the wrong guy. But again, it hasn't been perfect for any of these guys of late. It's been unfortunate that Josh Padilla has been hurt because I would have liked to see him get in there more and see more of what that looks like, because it's a small sample size we have to evaluate him. And the same is true with Gabe Van Sickle. And I know a lot of people made a lot of him playing better than Tegra when he came in later in the Big Ten championship game. I think some of that has to do with the way Ohio State was calling its offense. They weren't doing as deep dropbacks and things like that require the linemen to block for longer periods of time. I don't know why they didn't do that with Tegra, and maybe they did some of it, but I think that helped Gabe Van Sickle. And I thought Gabe actually played pretty well. I thought he played well against UCLA. I thought he did not play well against Rutgers, didn't play against Michigan. So, I have to trust that these coaches are seeing these guys every day in practice and are putting in the guy they think that helps them win the game. And for, this has been Tegra all season. It was Tegra all last season. The rotation seems to help with him. I don't know why they didn't rotate against Michigan or didn't rotate earlier against Indiana, but this is a guy who played and started for a national champion. And, again, he has not been good. He has not been good enough. And, I think it speaks to maybe the depth or the readiness of the depth to not be able to have somebody come and take that job. But it's not just Tegra is what I point out. And I don't think, I could be wrong, but I don't think that just inserting a new right guard, and even if that right guard plays better, is the ultimate answer. I think everybody has to play better. I think it has to be a full line thing. And it's not just in pass protection either. I think they can do a better job of opening holes and stuff for the running backs. So for me, that's going to be the biggest thing going forward. And I do think, I was talking earlier about it's unfortunate that you're the 2 seed. I do think you catch a little bit of a break because I think the 2 best defensive lines in this bracket are Texas Tech and Indiana, and you're not going to see either of them until the national championship, if at all. So you do catch a little bit of a break there, but that always seemed to be the way it was going to go with the top 4 teams in the country. So if this offensive line can get back to playing the way it was the first half of the season, find whatever it found a year ago, I think this team can still very much win a national championship. I think if you get to a game down the road, well, I think you can handle your business in the quarterfinal, regardless of the opponent. If you face Georgia in the semifinal, as everyone expects, then I think this is a good Georgia team. It's not an all-time great Georgia team. I think you went up against a close to all-time great Georgia team in the game in 2019. 2019? No, 2022. The game they lost by 1. Sorry, my years are all messed up as I reflected back on other games. But the game he lost as the ball dropped and the clock struck midnight. That game, that was an all-time great Georgia team with a really good defense and all that. So you can play with these guys. I don't think Georgia's at that level, and I think that Ohio State is still really good. So I think you can beat that Georgia team, though it will be tough. And that the Bulldogs are playing really well right now. And then you look beyond That and you're thinking likely Indiana or Texas Tech. I'd say if there's a team outside of those two that I would pick to get to the national championship, it's Oregon, which again speaks volumes to the Big Ten. Like, I think a healthy Oregon team is pretty dangerous and can do some things. And that would be an interesting matchup to break down and discuss as we get closer to it. But I think if this offensive line plays the way it's capable of, and the Buckeyes can sort of solve as much as possible some red zone issues, I think this team is damn near unstoppable. And I think you saw on Saturday what happens when you allow those two things to cause you issues. You couldn't score touchdowns in the red zone. Obviously, a missed field goal late in that game, but also the offensive line play wasn't good enough. The defense we know is going to play well. It played well enough. Yes, it gave up a couple big plays on Saturday against Indiana. Some throws that you haven't seen, but that's going to happen. If the offense is playing at its best, then those plays are unfortunate, but you get past them and you win the game. And that's what I think Ohio State can do if it handles its business. Practice right. Make sure you are ready to go come December 31st. You're ramping it up. Whatever you have to do to be ready to be playing your best then. It's going to be tough, especially against a team that's already played a game in the playoff. But that's the way the cookie crumbles, so to speak. Get this offensive line, whether it's health, whether it's changing people, whatever you have to do, this offensive line needs to be as good as it can be. And then, like I said, just be more creative in the red zone. Running the ball into the back of the offensive lineman, unless you are able to create better holes, I don't think works. I'd like to see some more creativity in the run game. I don't like the Nate Roberts tight end or fullback package. They brought Caden McDonald in as a fullback against Michigan. It didn't work, but like things like that, that's creative. I brought up on our message board the play they ran against Notre Dame, the Jeremiah Smith orbit motion that Devontae Smith ran against Ohio State. Like, where is that creativity in the red zone? Get more of that, and I hope they have some of that in there, because, rolling out to your left and throwing to Jeremiah Smith and hoping he's not covered by two guys, even though he's the only guy in the route, that's not going to work. The touchdown they did score in the red zone was Julian Sand having to make a play with his legs, which doesn't happen all that often, and Carnell Tate just getting open. Like, you can do better than that, right? Like, that shouldn't be the only way you can score in the red zone. So there's an opportunity. The path is there. You have to execute. You have to practice well. You have to be healthy. And that is the one thing with this time off is it does give those guys, any guys, time to get healthy, which I think is important. So I'm going to wrap it up, leave it there. Just sort of wanted to kind of take an early preview of the playoff. I've started diving in on Miami and Texas A&M. So as we get closer, and especially once we know which opponent we'll face, we can talk more about them. But thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Bucknuts Happy Hour. Again, if you're watching this on YouTube and you like our little holiday festive things, decorations, please be sure to hit that bell for notifications, hit the thumbs up button so you get all of our videos. And if you are listening to this on your podcast platform of choice, please leave us a 5-star review and subscribe to the channel. We appreciate it. And enjoy a weekend, not without football. We still have, I think, the Army-Navy game and whatnot, but you can kind of relax, get some things done this weekend. Hopefully a Bucknuts Happy Hour helps you get through it. Cheers.